The pregnancy test clattered to the marble floor as Victoria heard Marcus's voice through his office door. "She's getting too clingy, Amber. The baby changes everything." Victoria Sterling stood frozen outside her husband's corner office, 28 weeks pregnant, her hands trembling as she held the lunch bag she prepared with such care that morning. Through the crack in the mahogany door, she watched her husband of 3 years kiss his young marketing intern, a petite blonde who couldn't be older than 24. "I know, baby." Amber's voice was breathy, excited. "But you said after the baby comes, you'll file for divorce. We can finally be together properly." Marcus ran his fingers through Amber's hair, the same gesture he used to make with Victoria before she became what he apparently considered boring and predictable. The irony would have been laughable if Victoria's heart wasn't shattering into 1,000 pieces. "The timing has to be perfect," Marcus said, straightening his tie. "I need to document that she's completely dependent on me. No career, no skills, just a housewife who got pregnant to trap me. My lawyer says with the right approach, I can minimize the alimony to almost nothing." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Each syllable was a knife twisting deeper into her chest. She pressed her back against the hallway wall, fighting the sudden contraction that gripped her swollen belly. Not now. She couldn't lose control now. $2 million should be more than generous, Marcus continued. She'll probably be grateful. What's she going to do? Fight me? She doesn't even know what I'm worth. Amber giggled, a sound that made Victoria's skin crawl. Poor little Victoria. She has no idea what's coming, does she? None at all, Marcus said, his voice filled with satisfaction. She thinks I'm the devoted husband, bringing home flowers and playing the part. She has no idea I've been planning this exit strategy since she told me she was pregnant. Victoria's vision blurred. Whether from tears or the stress-induced dizziness, she couldn't tell. Her millionaire ex-husband-to-be had just revealed himself as a calculating narcissist who saw their unborn daughter as nothing more than an inconvenience in his carefully orchestrated life plan. The contraction intensified, and Victoria bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. She had to get away from this office, away from this building, before she collapsed entirely. But as she turned to leave, she heard Amber's next words that stopped her cold. "What about the baby? Will you want custody?" Marcus laughed, a harsh sound Victoria had never heard from him before. "Minimal contact, minimal responsibility. I'll play the busy executive card. Kids need stability, and I'll be building my new life with you. A baby would just complicate things." Victoria's hand instinctively moved to her belly, protecting the daughter she already loved more than life itself. Her husband wasn't just planning to abandon her, he was planning to abandon their child too. The man she'd built her entire world around for the past 3 years was discussing their family like a business transaction he couldn't wait to close. She forced herself to move, one painful step at a time, down the marble hallway of Whitfield Technologies. The company Marcus had built from nothing, or so she'd believed. The success story he'd told her about working 18-hour days and sleeping in his office to create something meaningful. All lies, all of it. Victoria made it to the elevator before the next contraction hit, this one strong enough to double her over. The cleaning lady, Mrs. Rodriguez, rushed to her side. "Senora Whitfield, are you okay? Should I call your husband?" "No," Victoria gasped, gripping the woman's arm. "Please, no, just help me to my car." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in her Mercedes in the hospital parking lot, trying to regulate her breathing as Dr. Sarah Mitchell had taught her. The contractions were subsiding, but the emotional trauma was just beginning to process. She pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who would understand. "Rebecca Hayes, attorney at law. This is Rebecca." "Becca, it's me." Victoria's voice cracked. "I need to see you. Now." "Victoria, honey, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "I can't talk about it over the phone. Can you meet me at the hospital? I'm having contractions, but I think they're stopping. I'm leaving now. Don't move, don't do anything until I get there." Victoria closed her eyes and leaned back against the leather seat. Rebecca had been her best friend since college, the one person who knew about the life Victoria had left behind, the secret that Marcus had never bothered to discover in all their years together. Because Marcus Whitfield, for all his intelligence and business acumen, had never once asked Victoria about her family or her past. He'd simply accepted her story about being estranged from her parents and needing to make her own way in the world. He'd found her independence attractive, even admirable, never suspecting that her independence was actually a choice born from privilege, not necessity. Victoria Sterling had been running from her father's shipping empire for 11 years, working as a museum curator and living modestly to prove she could make it on her own terms. She'd met Marcus at a charity gala where he was giving a presentation on innovative logistics solutions, never knowing that the woman listening so intently from the audience was the daughter of Heiress and Sterling, whose global shipping contracts could make or break companies exactly like his. The irony was devastating. Marcus had married the one woman who could have given him everything he'd ever dreamed of, and he was throwing it all away for a pretty face and the fantasy of starting over. As another mild contraction rippled through her belly, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She was done being the perfect, accommodating wife. She was done protecting Marcus from the consequences of his choices. It was time for Victoria Sterling to come home. Victoria's hands shook as she signed the hospital discharge papers 2 hours later. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had confirmed that the contractions were stress-induced and had stopped completely, but she'd insisted on monitoring both Victoria and the baby for an extended period. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Dr. Mitchell said, her kind eyes filled with concern. "I need you to avoid stress as much as possible for the remainder of your pregnancy. Bed rest isn't necessary yet, but you need to take care of yourself." "I understand," Victoria replied, though she knew that avoiding stress was about to become impossible. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her usually perfect lawyer appearance slightly disheveled from rushing across town. At 35, Rebecca had built her family law practice from nothing, specializing in high-asset divorce cases. She was everything Victoria had thought she wanted to be: independent, successful, and accountable to no one but herself. "The nurse said you're okay to leave?" Rebecca asked, studying Victoria's face carefully. "Physically, yes. Emotionally," Victoria shook her head. "Can we go to your office? I need to tell you something, and it's not a conversation for public spaces." An hour later, Victoria sat in Rebecca's downtown law office, overlooking the city skyline. She'd driven this route hundreds of times over the past 3 years, never realizing she was passing buildings her family's shipping empire had helped construct through strategic partnerships and logistics contracts. "Start from the beginning," Rebecca said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. "What happened today?" Victoria took a deep breath and told her everything. Marcus's affair, his divorce plans, his casual dismissal of their unborn daughter. Rebecca's expression grew darker with each detail. "That bastard," Rebecca muttered when Victoria finished. 3 years of marriage, and this is how he repays your devotion?" "It gets worse," Victoria said quietly. "He has no idea who I really am." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" For the first time in 11 years, Victoria said her real name out loud. "I'm Victoria Sterling, Harrison Sterling's daughter." The coffee cup slipped from Rebecca's hands and sending coffee splashing across the desk. "Sterling Global Shipping? The Harrison Sterling who owns half the shipping routes in the world?" "The same one?" Victoria pulled tissues from the box and helped Rebecca clean up the spill. "I ran away when I was 18 after he tried to arrange a marriage with some oil executive's son. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own, so I took my mother's maiden name and started over." Rebecca stared at her for a long moment. "Victoria, do you have any idea what this means? Sterling Global is worth what, $20 billion? $23 billion as of last quarter," Victoria said automatically. "I still read the financial reports. Old habits. And Marcus has no clue? None whatsoever. He never asked about my family. When I said they were estranged and I preferred not to discuss them, he just accepted it. He was so impressed with my independence and my determination to make my own way." Victoria's voice turned bitter. "Little did he know I was slumming it." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her lawyer's mind clearly racing. "Victoria, this changes everything. With your connection to Sterling Global, you have leverage Marcus can't even imagine." "I know." Victoria placed her hands on her belly, feeling a soft kick from her daughter. "But I need to be smart about this. If I reveal who I am too early, he'll try to reconcile. He'll claim he loves me and wants to work things out, and it will all be lies motivated by greed. So what's your plan?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, staring out at the harbor where Sterling Global ships move cargo worth millions of dollars every day. I want to let him dig his own grave first. Let him file for divorce. Let him reveal exactly how little he thinks of me and our daughter. Then when he's committed to his path and there's no going back, I'll show him what he's really losing. Rebecca smiled grimly. Remind me never to cross you. There's something else you should know, Victoria continued. I did some research on Marcus's company when we were dating. Sterling Global actually provides logistics contracts to dozens of mid-sized companies through subsidiary partnerships. Marcus has been benefiting from my family's business empire for years without knowing it. How much of his revenue comes from Sterling contracts? I'd estimate 30 to 40%, though it's filtered through enough shell companies that he'd never know the connection. My father has a policy of diversifying partnerships to avoid creating dependencies, but if all those contracts disappeared at once, his company would collapse, Rebecca finished, like a house of cards. Victoria stood up, feeling more in control than she had since hearing Marcus's betrayal that morning. But I want to be absolutely certain about my legal position before I make any moves. Can you research what I'd be entitled to in a divorce, both with and without revealing my identity? I'll have a full analysis ready by tomorrow, Rebecca promised. But Victoria, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go to war with Marcus? There might be easier ways to handle this. Victoria thought about Marcus laughing as he discussed their daughter, like a burden he couldn't wait to shed. He made his choice when he decided our family was disposable. Now he gets to live with the consequences. As Victoria drove home that evening, she passed the Sterling Global headquarters without stopping. But for the first time in 11 years, she allowed herself to really look at the building where she'd spent every summer of her childhood, learning about shipping routes and international trade from her father. The building had expanded since she'd last been there, reaching even higher into the Seattle skyline. Her father had continued building the empire, probably hoping she'd eventually come home to inherit it. Now she was going home, but not in the way anyone expected. At the red light, Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in over a decade. Her finger hovered over Thomas Blackwood's name. As the family's chief legal counsel, Thomas would be the perfect person to help her navigate what came next. But not yet. First, she needed to let Marcus show her exactly who he really was, and she had a feeling she wouldn't have to wait long. Victoria woke the next morning to the sound of Marcus's shower running. For a moment, she almost forgot about the previous day's revelations. It would have been so easy to slip back into their routine, to pretend she hadn't heard him planning her abandonment. But then she remembered Amber's giggle, Marcus's casual dismissal of their daughter, and the steel returned to her spine. "Good morning, sweetheart," Marcus said as he entered their bedroom, adjusting his tie. "How are you feeling? You seemed exhausted when you got home yesterday." Victoria arranged her expression into the trusting smile she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. "Much better. The doctor said it was just stress contractions. Nothing to worry about." "Stress?" Marcus frowned, though Victoria noticed he didn't ask what might be stressing her. "Well, try to take it easy today. Maybe do some shopping for the nursery or something relaxing." The suggestion was so dismissive, so perfectly aligned with his view of her as a simple housewife with simple concerns, that Victoria almost laughed. Instead, she nodded obediently. "That sounds lovely. Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably late again. Big presentation this week." Marcus kissed her forehead perfunctorily. "I'll grab something at the office." With Amber, Victoria thought, but kept her expression neutral. "Of course, I understand." After Marcus left, Victoria moved with purpose. She'd spent the early morning hours researching her legal options online, and Rebecca's preliminary findings had been encouraging. Washington was a community property state, which meant Victoria was entitled to half of everything acquired during their marriage. But first, she needed to understand exactly what everything included. Victoria had never paid much attention to Marcus's business dealings during their marriage. She trusted him completely, believing his success was built on innovation and hard work. Now she realized how naive she'd been. Marcus's home office was normally off-limits during business hours, but Victoria had her own key. As the perfect wife, she occasionally needed to retrieve important documents or clean up after his late-night work sessions. Today, she was conducting reconnaissance. Marcus's filing system was meticulous, a trait that would now work against him. Victoria photographed financial statements, contract summaries, and correspondence with key clients. What she discovered made her hands shake with something beyond pregnancy hormones. Whitfield Technologies was much more precarious than Marcus had ever admitted. Despite his public success and the luxury lifestyle they maintained, the company was heavily leveraged and dependent on a small number of major contracts. And 3 of those contracts, representing nearly 40% of the company's revenue, were with subsidiaries of Sterling Global Shipping. Victoria cross-referenced the contract dates with her own timeline. Marcus had landed the first Sterling contract just 6 months after they started dating. The second had come through shortly after their engagement. The third had been signed just after their wedding. Her father had been supporting Marcus's business all along, completely unaware that he was subsidizing the lifestyle of the man who'd stolen his daughter's heart. The irony was breathtaking. Heiress and Sterling had spent 11 years wondering if his estranged daughter was struggling financially, never knowing she was living in luxury, funded partly by his own company's contracts. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Legal analysis complete. Can you meet for lunch?" An hour later, Victoria sat across from Rebecca at an upscale restaurant downtown, picking at a salad while her friend outlined her options. "The good news is that Washington's community property laws are very favorable," Rebecca explained. "You're entitled to half of everything, including the business appreciation during your marriage. Based on Marcus's financial statements, that could be substantial. And the bad news? Marcus is smart enough to have protected himself. He's been documenting your role as a non-contributing spouse. No income, no business involvement, just household management. His lawyers will argue that you deserve minimal ongoing support." "Ah ha ha," Victoria almost smiled. "What if I weren't exactly a non-contributing spouse?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "What if I could prove that my family connections were directly responsible for a significant portion of his business success? That would change everything. But you'd have to reveal your identity to use that leverage." "I know," Victoria leaned back in her chair, feeling her daughter kick as if responding to the tension. "I'm not ready for that yet. I want to see how far Marcus will go first." "Victoria, I have to ask, have you considered that Marcus might genuinely love you? Maybe the affair is just a midlife crisis, and he's not thinking clearly?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Rebecca the recording she'd made the previous day. Her friend's expression grew grim as she listened to Marcus's casual calculations about minimizing child support and avoiding meaningful custody arrangements. "Never mind," Rebecca said quietly. "He's made his choice." That afternoon, Victoria implemented the first phase of her plan. She called Marcus's office, knowing he'd be in meetings, and left a message with his assistant Jennifer. "Please tell Mr. Whitfield that I'm feeling much better, and I'd love to attend the company dinner this Friday. I know how important these events are for his business relationships." Victoria had attended dozens of Whitfield Technologies events over the years, playing the perfect supportive wife. She'd smiled and made small talk with clients while Marcus networked and closed deals. She'd been the ideal corporate spouse, beautiful and charming, but never threatening or competitive. This time would be different. This time, Victoria Sterling was going to war, and Marcus Whitfield had no idea what was coming. The financial independence she'd always possessed was about to become the weapon that destroyed him. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable rain, turning the windows of the Grand Hyatt's ballroom into abstract art as droplets raced toward the bottom. Victoria stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the deep blue maternity dress that highlighted her pregnancy glow while maintaining an aura of sophistication. At 32 weeks pregnant, she could no longer hide her condition, but she'd learned to use it as both shield and weapon. Tonight, she would be the devoted pregnant wife, radiating domestic contentment while secretly documenting every detail of Marcus's betrayal. "You look beautiful," Marcus said, appearing behind her in the mirror. His reflection showed a man who still considered himself charming, adjusting his bow tie with practiced confidence. "Thank you," Victoria smiled, the expression she'd perfected over years of marriage. "I'm excited to meet the new team members you've been working with so closely." Marcus's hand stilled on his tie for just a moment. "New team members? Your assistant mentioned you've been putting in long hours with some of the younger staff. I'd love to put faces to names." It was a perfectly innocent comment. the kind of supportive inquiry any wife might make. But Victoria watched Marcus's reflection carefully, noting the slight tension that appeared around his eyes. "Oh, well, you know how it is. Training new people, making sure everyone's up to speed." Marcus moved away from the mirror, checking his watch. "We should get going. Don't want to be late." The drive to the hotel was filled with comfortable small talk about the baby, their dinner plans for the following week, and Marcus's upcoming business trip to Portland. Victoria contributed appropriate responses while mentally preparing for what she was about to witness. She'd purchased a new handbag specifically for tonight, one with a discreet recording device built into the lining. Whatever happened at this dinner, she'd have documentation. The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived, filled with the kind of successful professionals who made Whitfield Technologies possible. Victoria recognized most of the faces from previous events, though several were new since the company's recent expansion. Marcus, a distinguished older man, approached them, hand extended. "And the lovely Victoria. How are you feeling, my dear?" "Wonderful, Mr. Patterson," Victoria replied, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "The baby's due in just 8 weeks. How exciting, and how fortunate that Marcus will be able to focus on family soon. I imagine you're both looking forward to some quiet time together." Victoria felt Marcus tense beside her. "Actually, we're busier than ever," he said quickly. "Big contracts coming up, new partnerships to develop. You know how it is." Of course, of course." Patterson's smile faltered slightly. "Well, family is important too." As Patterson moved away, Victoria filed the interaction in her memory. Marcus was clearly uncomfortable with any suggestion that he might prioritize family time over business opportunities. "Victoria, darling." Victoria turned to find herself face to face with Sandra Whitfield, Marcus's mother, who'd flown in from San Francisco for the event. Sandra was everything Victoria had tried to become: perfectly groomed, socially adept, and completely devoted to her son's success. "Sandra, what a wonderful surprise," Victoria said, accepting her mother-in-law's enthusiastic embrace. "I wouldn't miss it. Marcus tells me business is booming." Sandra lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He also mentioned you've been having some health concerns?" Victoria caught Marcus shooting his mother a warning look. "Just normal pregnancy issues, nothing serious." "Well, you must take care of yourself. Marcus needs you healthy and happy." Sandra's smile was warm, but held an undertone Victoria had never noticed before. "A successful man needs a stable home life." The words felt loaded with meaning Victoria was only beginning to understand. Had Marcus been preparing his family for their divorce, framing Victoria as unstable or problematic? "Of course," Victoria replied smoothly. "Marcus's happiness is my top priority." As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself studying the dynamics around her with new eyes. She'd attended these events dozens of times, but she'd never really observed how Marcus interacted with his female employees. And then she saw her. Amber Chen, though Victoria now knew her last name was actually Collins, stood near the bar in a black cocktail dress that left little to the imagination. She was younger than Victoria had realized, probably no more than 24, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from believing she was smarter than everyone around her. "Who's the blonde by the bar?" Victoria asked casually. Marcus followed her gaze, and Victoria watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Amber Collins, new marketing coordinator, very talented. She's quite young." "Fresh perspectives are valuable in marketing," Marcus replied, his tone neutral, but his body language suddenly defensive. Victoria filed away every detail as she watched Marcus navigate the room. He was careful never to spend too much time near Amber, but Victoria caught the meaningful glances, the subtle touches when they passed each other, the way Amber's face lit up whenever Marcus was nearby. The narcissistic abuse wasn't limited to Victoria, she realized. Marcus was playing both women, making each feel special while protecting his own interests above all else. Dinner was announced, and Victoria found herself seated at the head table between Marcus and his business partner, David Chen, who she now realized must be related to Amber. The irony of the family connection wasn't lost on her. "David," Victoria said warmly, "I don't think I've met your sister before tonight." David looked confused. "My sister? I don't have a sister here tonight." "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Amber Collins might be related to you." "Amber? No, no relation. Why would you think that?" Victoria filed away another piece of information. Amber had lied about her name, probably to avoid complications with workplace relationships. As the evening progressed, Victoria excused herself to use the restroom, timing her departure to coincide with Amber's. The women's lounge was empty except for the two of them, providing the perfect opportunity for reconnaissance. "Excuse me," Victoria said as Amber touched up her lipstick. "You're Amber, right? I'm Victoria Whitfield." Amber's hand stilled on her lipstick. "Oh, Mrs. Whitfield, it's nice to meet you. Please call me Victoria. Marcus has mentioned how valuable you've been to the team. He's been very supportive of my career development," Amber replied carefully. Victoria studied the younger woman's reflection in the mirror. "That's wonderful. Marcus is such a good mentor. I'm sure your boyfriend appreciates how dedicated you are to your work." "I'm not seeing anyone right now," Amber said, her voice carrying a slight edge. "I'm focused on my career." "How wise. Relationships can be so complicated, especially in the workplace." Victoria applied her own lipstick with steady hands. "Though I suppose when you find the right person, complications don't matter anymore." Amber's eyes met Victoria's in the mirror, and for a moment, Victoria saw something like guilt flicker across the younger woman's face. "Yes, well, I should get back to the dinner," Amber said quickly. "Of course. It was lovely meeting you." Victoria returned to the table with renewed purpose. She'd confirmed her suspicions about Amber, documented Marcus's discomfort with family-focused conversations, and gathered enough material to begin building her case. As the evening wound down, Victoria played her final card. "Marcus, darling," she said as they prepared to leave, "would it be possible for me to visit your office next week? I'd love to see the new renovations, and Dr. Mitchell suggested I get out of the house more often." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment. "Next week might not be ideal. We're in the middle of some sensitive negotiations." "Of course. I wouldn't want to be in the way." Victoria squeezed his arm affectionately. "Perhaps when things calm down." But Victoria had no intention of waiting for things to calm down. Marcus's reaction told her everything she needed to know about what was happening in his office during those long hours he claimed to be working. As they drove home in comfortable silence, Victoria mentally reviewed the evening's intelligence gathering. She had enough now to begin phase 2 of her plan. It was time to contact Thomas Blackwood. Victoria waited until Marcus left for his Portland business trip before making the call that would change everything. At 34 weeks pregnant, she moved more slowly than usual, but her mind was sharp with purpose as she settled into Marcus's home office chair. The number for Thomas Blackwood's direct line hadn't changed in 11 years. "Blackwood speaking." "Hello, Thomas. It's Victoria Sterling." The silence stretched so long that Victoria wondered if the connection had failed. "Victoria?" Thomas's voice was careful, controlled. "My God, child, where have you been? Your parents have been—" "I know," Victoria interrupted gently. "Thomas, I need your help, but this conversation needs to remain confidential until I decide how to proceed." "Of course. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Victoria almost laughed at the question. "You could say that. I'm married, Thomas, have been for 3 years, and I'm about to become involved in what I suspect will be a very complicated divorce." Another pause. "I see. And your husband doesn't know who you are?" "He has no idea. He thinks he married a museum curator with no family connections and no money." Victoria took a deep breath. "Thomas, his company has been receiving Sterling Global contracts for years. He's built his success partly on my family's business empire without knowing it." Thomas's intake of breath was audible. "Victoria, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "I need you to run an analysis of Sterling Global's current contracts with Whitfield Technologies. I need to know exactly how much revenue we're providing them and how quickly those contracts could be redirected if necessary. This is about more than just a divorce settlement, isn't it?" Victoria thought about Marcus's plan to abandon their daughter, his casual cruelty, his assumption that she was too weak and naive to fight back. "My husband is planning to leave me and our unborn daughter with minimal support because he thinks I have no leverage. He's been having an affair for months and discussing our child like she's a burden he can't wait to shed." Victoria's voice hardened. "I want him to understand exactly what he's throwing away before he makes his final decision." "I understand." Thomas's tone had shifted to the protective mode Victoria remembered from her childhood. Give me 48 hours to compile the financial analysis. But Victoria, I think you should also consider speaking with your parents. They've missed you terribly." Victoria stared out the window at the Seattle skyline, knowing that somewhere in those buildings, her father was probably reviewing quarterly reports while her mother organized another charity gala. "Not yet," she said quietly. "I need to handle this my way first. But Thomas, if things escalate, would you be willing to represent me?" "Child, I've been hoping for this call for 11 years. Of course I'll represent you." After ending the call, Victoria felt simultaneously energized and terrified. She'd set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped, crossed a line she'd been avoiding for over a decade. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," she answered, her voice warm and unsuspecting. "Hi, beautiful. Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "Good. Tired, but good. How's Portland?" "Busy. Lots of meetings, potential new contracts. I might need to extend the trip by a day." Victoria closed her eyes, knowing without doubt that Amber was with him. "Of course, business comes first. You're amazing, you know that. So understanding." Marcus's voice carried that particular tone he used when he wanted to feel good about himself. "I'm lucky to have you." The words that should have warmed her heart now felt like acid. "I'm the lucky one, Marcus. You've given me everything I could ever want." After they hung up, Victoria sat in the quiet office, surrounded by evidence of Marcus's success. Success that was partially built on her family's foundation, though he'd never bothered to learn enough about her to discover that connection. Her laptop chimed with an email from Rebecca. "Can you meet for lunch tomorrow? I have updates on your situation that we need to discuss in person." Victoria replied affirmatively, then turned her attention to the task that had been occupying her thoughts since the company dinner. She needed to understand exactly what Marcus was worth, and more importantly, what he thought he could hide from her in a divorce. The financial documents in his office painted a picture of a man living beyond his means to maintain an image of success. The luxury cars, the expensive house, the country club memberships, all financed through a complex web of business loans and credit lines. Marcus Whitfield was essentially broke without his business income, and his business income was more dependent on Sterling Global than he realized. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Jennifer from your husband's office. I wanted to let you know that Mr. Whitfield asked me to book a second hotel room for his Portland trip. I thought you should know in case there was confusion about billing." Victoria stared at the message, understanding its significance. Jennifer Walsh had worked for Marcus for years, had probably watched him lie to Victoria countless times. This was her way of providing evidence without directly betraying her employer. Women supporting women, Victoria thought grimly, even in the middle of a war. She screenshot the message and forwarded it to Rebecca with a note. "More ammunition." 24 hours later, Victoria sat across from Rebecca in their usual restaurant, feeling the weight of her growing daughter and the magnitude of the decisions ahead of her. "Thomas called me this morning," Rebecca said without preamble. "He outlined the Sterling Global situation. Victoria, do you understand what you're sitting on? A nuclear weapon disguised as a divorce case? That's one way to put it." Rebecca slid a folder across the table. "These are Thomas's preliminary findings. Sterling Global provides Whitfield Technologies with contracts worth approximately $15 million annually." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "That's higher than I estimated." "It gets better. Marcus's company is leveraged to the point where losing those contracts would force immediate bankruptcy. He'd go from being worth several $1,000,000 to being personally liable for debts he can't cover. And my divorce settlement? With the Sterling connection revealed, you could claim that your family relationships were instrumental in building the business. You'd be entitled to far more than half of everything." Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "What about custody of Charlotte? A bankrupt father with a history of adultery who planned to abandon his child? You'd have no trouble getting full custody with minimal visitation rights." "And if I don't reveal the Sterling connection?" Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Then you're looking at a much more difficult fight. Marcus has been documenting your role as a dependent spouse. His lawyers will argue for minimal alimony and shared custody, claiming he can provide better financial stability for the child." Victoria felt her daughter kick, as if responding to the conversation about her future. "How long do I have to decide?" Thomas estimates that Marcus will file for divorce within the next 2 weeks, probably as soon as he returns from Portland and confirms that his affair is sustainable. 2 weeks. Victoria leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of her. Victoria, I have to ask, what do you want the outcome to be? Revenge? Financial security? Or do you want to try to save your marriage? Victoria thought about Marcus's laugh as he described their daughter as a burden. I want justice, Rebecca. I want him to understand exactly what he's choosing to throw away. And I want my daughter to grow up knowing she's valued and protected. Then we go to war? Victoria nodded slowly. We go to war, but on my terms and in my timing. As she drove home that afternoon, Victoria passed the Sterling Global headquarters again. This time she pulled into the visitor parking garage and sat staring up at the building that represented everything she'd walked away from 11 years ago. Her phone rang. Thomas Blackwood's name appeared on the screen. Thomas. Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation. I really believe you should speak with your parents before this situation escalates further. They deserve to know about their granddaughter. Victoria placed her hand on her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of kicks that had become her daughter's way of communicating. You're right, she said quietly. It's time to come home. The Sterling family mansion hadn't changed in 11 years. Victoria sat in her rental car outside the wrought iron gates, 35 weeks pregnant and terrified in a way she hadn't been since leaving home at 18. Through the gates, she could see the circular driveway, the fountain her mother had imported from Italy, the rose garden where she'd played as a child. Everything looked exactly the same, as if the house had been frozen in time, waiting for her return. Thomas had arranged the meeting carefully. Harrison and Margaret Sterling believed they were meeting with a potential business partner who required discretion. They had no idea their estranged daughter was about to walk through their front door. Victoria checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing her hair and adjusting the elegant maternity dress she'd chosen for this moment. She looked successful, confident, and undeniably pregnant. Whatever happened in the next hour would set the tone for everything that came after. The gates opened automatically as she approached, recognizing the access code Thomas had provided. Victoria drove slowly up the familiar driveway, past the perfectly manicured gardens, and toward the house that had shaped her entire childhood. Margaret Sterling answered the door herself, which was unusual. The household staff typically handled visitors, but Thomas had requested privacy for this meeting. Victoria watched her mother's face transform from polite curiosity to shock to overwhelming joy in the space of a heartbeat. Victoria? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Mother. Margaret burst into tears, reaching for Victoria with shaking hands. Oh, my darling girl. Oh, my baby. She pulled Victoria into a fierce embrace, mindful of her pregnancy. You're here. You're really here. Where is she? What's all the commotion? Harrison Sterling's voice carried down the hallway, followed by his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway still talking. Thomas said the meeting was urgent, but he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Victoria. Harrison Sterling was 67 years old, a man who'd built a global empire through intelligence, determination, and careful emotional control. Victoria had seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without flinching, handle crisis situations with calm authority, and command respect from world leaders. She'd never seen him cry. Dad, she said simply. Harrison crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped both his wife and daughter in his arms. For a moment, they stood in the elegant foyer like a family photograph, 11 years of separation dissolving into this single moment of reunion. You're pregnant, Margaret finally said, pulling back to study Victoria's face. How far along? 35 weeks. It's a girl. A granddaughter, Harrison said, wonder in his voice. Margaret, we're going to have a granddaughter. Margaret was crying again, reaching out to touch Victoria's belly with gentle hands. Is the father? Are you married? I am. Victoria's voice carried the first hint of the complexity that had brought her home. That's actually why I'm here. I need your help. They moved to Harrison's study, the same room where Victoria had spent countless hours as a child, learning about shipping routes and international trade while her father worked. The massive desk still dominated the space, covered with papers and reports that represented the daily operation of a global empire. Tell us everything, Harrison said, settling into his chair while Margaret took Victoria's hands. Victoria told them about Marcus, about their marriage, about his complete ignorance of her true identity. She explained his business, his success, and his current betrayal with careful precision. When she finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. "He doesn't know," Harrison said finally. 3 years of marriage, and he's never asked about your family? He thinks I'm estranged from middle-class parents who disapproved of my independence." Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "He's proud of marrying a woman who made her own way in the world." Margaret's expression had shifted from joy to fury. "And now he wants to abandon you and our granddaughter because he thinks you have no resources to fight back?" "That's the plan. He's been consulting divorce attorneys, documenting my dependence on him, planning to offer a minimal settlement because he believes I have no choice but to accept it." Harrison stood up and moved to the window overlooking the harbor, where Sterling Global ships moved cargo worth millions of dollars. "What exactly do you need from us?" "Information initially. Thomas is analyzing the contracts between Sterling Global and Marcus's company. I need to understand exactly how much leverage I have." "And then?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I want to let Marcus destroy himself completely before I reveal who I am. I want him to file for divorce, to commit fully to his betrayal, to show me exactly how little he values our family. Then I want him to understand what he's really losing." Harrison turned back to his daughter, and Victoria saw something in his expression that reminded her why he'd been so successful in business. It was the look of a man who'd decided to go to war. "Victoria, what you're describing isn't just a divorce. It's a complete dismantling of his life and business." "I know. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Victoria thought about Marcus laughing as he discussed their daughter like a burden, about Amber giggling in the hallway, about the casual cruelty of his planning. "He made his choice when he decided our family was disposable. I'm just making sure he understands the full cost of that choice." Margaret squeezed Victoria's hands. "What about our granddaughter? What kind of father will he be after all this?" Based on his conversations with his girlfriend, he plans to be an absent father regardless. At least this way, Charlotte will grow up knowing she's valued and protected. Harrison returned to his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Thomas briefed me on the preliminary contract analysis. Whitfield Technologies is more dependent on Sterling Global than even you realize. Without our contracts, his company becomes worthless overnight." "How quickly could you redirect those contracts?" 2 weeks, maybe less if I make some calls." Harrison's smile was sharp. "Business relationships change, Victoria. Companies that don't maintain proper partnerships sometimes find themselves without partners." Victoria felt a flutter that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "What about the legal implications? Could Marcus claim I used family connections to sabotage him?" "He'd have to prove you had access to confidential Sterling Global information and used it maliciously," Margaret said. "But you're simply a Sterling family member who asked for help during a personal crisis. Family businesses help family members. That's not illegal." "Besides," Harrison added, "Marcus would have to admit he never bothered to learn his wife's maiden name to make that argument." They spent the next 2 hours planning strategy. Harrison would accelerate the contract review process, looking for justifications to redirect Sterling Global business away from Whitfield Technologies. Margaret would research child custody law, ensuring they understood Victoria's rights as a mother. Thomas would coordinate the legal aspects, preparing for a battle that would extend far beyond a simple divorce. As Victoria prepared to leave, Margaret walked her to the car. "I have to ask," her mother said quietly, "are you sure this is the only way? Couldn't you try to save your marriage by revealing who you are?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Mother, if I told Marcus who I was tomorrow, he'd probably cancel his divorce plans immediately. He'd claim he loves me and wants to work things out. And that would be wrong? It wouldn't be real. He'd be choosing the Sterling fortune, not me. And what kind of foundation would that be for raising Charlotte?" Victoria shook her head. "I need to know that the man raising my daughter values her for who she is, not what she can provide him." Margaret nodded slowly. "Your father is going to enjoy this, you know. He's always said that people who underestimate others deserve whatever consequences follow." "And you," Margaret's smile was fierce, I'm a mother about to meet her granddaughter. I'll do whatever it takes to protect both of you." As Victoria drove away from the Sterling mansion, she felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in 11 years. She was no longer running from her family or hiding from her identity. She was Victoria Sterling Whitfield, and she was about to show Marcus exactly what that meant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coming home tomorrow. Miss you. Can't wait to see you." Victoria smiled as she typed her response. "Can't wait to see you too. We have so much to discuss." Victoria's water broke at 3:17 in the morning on a Tuesday, 4 weeks before her due date. She woke to the familiar sensation of cramping, but this time it was accompanied by a warm wetness that left no doubt about what was happening. "Marcus," she said, shaking her husband's shoulder. "Marcus, wake up. It's time." He groaned and rolled away from her. "Time for what?" "The baby. My water just broke." Marcus bolted upright, instantly alert. "Are you sure? It's too early." "Tell that to your daughter." Victoria was already moving carefully toward the bathroom, feeling the first real contraction grip her body. "We need to get to the hospital." The next hour passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Marcus threw clothes into a bag while Victoria timed her contractions, which were coming faster and stronger than expected. By the time they reached Seattle General, Victoria was deep in active labor. "How far apart are the contractions?" Dr. Sarah Mitchell asked as Victoria was wheeled into a delivery room. 3 minutes, Victoria gasped. "They started really strong." "That's normal for second babies," Dr. Mitchell said, then paused. "Wait, this is your first?" "Yes." "Well, your daughter is certainly eager to meet you. Let's get you comfortable and see how far along you are." The examination revealed that Victoria was already 7 centimeters dilated, progressing faster than anyone had expected. Marcus paced the room, checking his phone constantly despite the early hour. "Who could possibly be calling you at 4 in the morning?" Victoria asked between contractions. "Just the security service. They sent an alert about unusual network activity." Marcus looked up from his phone with a distracted expression. "Probably nothing, but I should check on it." "Marcus, I'm having our baby. Can't the network wait a few hours?" "Of course. You're absolutely right." Marcus put his phone on silent and took Victoria's hand. "I'm here. I'm completely focused on you." The promise lasted exactly 23 minutes. Victoria was in the middle of a particularly intense contraction when Marcus's phone lit up with an incoming call. She watched him glance at the screen, see something that made his jaw tighten, and step away from her bedside. "I have to take this," he whispered. "It's urgent." "Marcus, please." But he was already moving toward the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Victoria heard fragments of his conversation through the door. "How much of a loss? Can we contain it? What about the Portland contracts?" A nurse appeared at Victoria's side, offering the support Marcus should have been providing. "First babies are scary for fathers sometimes," she said kindly. "He'll be back." But Marcus didn't come back. Not when Victoria progressed to full dilation, not when she began pushing, and not when Charlotte Elizabeth Whitfield entered the world at 6:47 a.m., weighing 5 pounds, 8 ounces, and screaming with impressive volume. "She's perfect," Dr. Mitchell announced, placing the baby on Victoria's chest. "Small but healthy. Looks like she just couldn't wait to meet her mama." Victoria stared down at her daughter's face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. Charlotte had Marcus's dark hair, but Victoria's blue eyes, and she gripped her mother's finger with surprising strength. "Where's Daddy?" the nurse asked, looking around the room. "Handling a business emergency," Victoria said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Marcus finally returned 45 minutes later, just as the nurses were finishing Charlotte's newborn assessments. He looked harried and stressed, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "I'm so sorry," he said, rushing to Victoria's side. "There was a crisis at the company. Major client pulled a contract overnight, and I had to—" He stopped when he saw the baby in Victoria's arms. "Oh my God, she's here." "She's been here for almost an hour," Victoria said quietly. Marcus's face flushed. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I know the timing was terrible, but this could destroy everything we've built." Everything we've built. Not everything he'd built for their family, but everything they'd built together. as if Victoria's labor and delivery were somehow inconvenient interruptions to their shared business venture. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Victoria asked. Marcus approached cautiously, accepting the baby with awkward arms. Charlotte immediately began fussing, sensing his tension. "She doesn't like me," Marcus said, looking panicked. "She doesn't know you yet," Victoria replied. "Babies need time to bond with their fathers. Especially when their fathers prioritize business calls over their birth," she added silently. Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it reflexively, and Victoria saw his jaw tighten as he read the message. "What now?" Victoria asked. "Nothing that can't wait," Marcus said quickly, but Victoria noticed he didn't put the phone away. Over the next 2 days in the hospital, the pattern continued. Marcus would arrive for visiting hours, hold Charlotte for a few obligatory minutes, then find excuses to step outside and handle urgent business matters. He spent more time on conference calls than he did bonding with his newborn daughter. "Is everything okay with Mr. Whitfield?" Dr. Mitchell asked during Victoria's discharge examination. "He seems very stressed." "Business problems," Victoria explained. "He's dealing with some lost contracts." "I see. Well, make sure he understands that these first few weeks are crucial for bonding. Babies need both parents to be present and engaged." Victoria almost laughed at the irony. Marcus was about to become the most absent father imaginable, and he didn't even realize it yet. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Marcus finally explained the source of his distraction. "I didn't want to worry you while you were in labor," he said, buckling Charlotte's car seat with clumsy fingers. "But we lost 3 major contracts over the weekend. Companies that have been with us for years just suddenly terminated their agreements." Victoria felt a flutter of anticipation. Her father's timeline was accelerating. "That's terrible. Do you know why?" "Corporate restructuring," they said. "Budget cuts, new partnerships, the usual business speak." Marcus's voice was grim. "But losing all 3 at once feels coordinated." "What does that mean for the company?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "It means we're in trouble. Real trouble. Those contracts represented about 40% of our revenue." Victoria made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally marveling at the precision of her father's strategy. Heiress and Sterling had managed to eliminate Marcus's Sterling global income without revealing the connection, making it appear like a series of unfortunate business decisions. "What will you do?" Victoria asked. "Fight, scramble for new contracts, cut expenses, do whatever it takes to keep the company afloat." Marcus looked at Charlotte sleeping in her car seat, and Victoria saw something cold flicker across his expression. This couldn't have happened at a worse time. The implication was clear. Charlotte's arrival was an additional burden Marcus couldn't afford, not a blessing worth celebrating. As they drove home from the hospital, Victoria made a decision. She'd given Marcus every opportunity to prove himself as a father and husband. Instead, he'd shown her exactly who he really was. A man who saw his family as assets to be managed or liabilities to be minimized. It was time for phase 2 of her plan. That evening, while Marcus worked late at the office, trying to salvage his failing business, Victoria called Thomas Blackwood. "How's our granddaughter?" Thomas asked warmly. "Perfect. And Marcus has just confirmed everything we suspected about his priorities." "He missed the birth?" "He left during labor to handle business calls. He spent more time on his phone than bonding with Charlotte." Victoria looked down at her sleeping daughter. "Thomas, I'm ready to escalate." "Are you sure? Once we begin active measures, there's no going back." Victoria thought about Marcus's expression when he looked at Charlotte, the calculation she'd seen there. "I'm sure. My daughter deserves better than a father who sees her as a burden." "Then let's give Marcus Whitfield exactly what he's asking for." 2 weeks after Charlotte's birth, Victoria had settled into the exhausting rhythm of new motherhood. She was breastfeeding every 3 hours, surviving on fragmented sleep, and navigating the profound transformation that came with becoming responsible for another human life. Marcus, meanwhile, had thrown himself into saving his business with single-minded determination. He left early, returned late, and spent most of his time at home on conference calls or buried in financial projections. When he did interact with Charlotte, it was with the dutiful obligation of a man checking items off a list, rather than the joy of a father bonding with his daughter. "She's lucky she has you," he'd said that morning, watching Victoria nurse Charlotte before dawn. "I'm no good with babies anyway." It was the kind of comment that revealed everything about Marcus's mindset. Parenting wasn't something to learn or grow into. It was a natural talent you either possessed or didn't. And since he didn't possess it, he was absolved of responsibility. Victoria had been tracking Marcus's increasingly desperate attempts to replace the lost sterling global contracts. He'd taken meetings with companies he'd previously considered beneath his standards, had started pursuing international partnerships that required extensive travel, and had even considered taking on debt that would leverage the company beyond any reasonable risk tolerance. What Marcus didn't know was that Heiress and Sterling had quietly contacted several of those potential new partners, subtly indicating that Whitfield Technologies might not be a stable long-term investment. Not through any false statements or unethical interference, but simply through the kind of informal business intelligence that flowed naturally through industry networks. When Heiress and Sterling suggested that a company might want to be cautious about new partnerships, smart executives listened. Victoria was burping Charlotte after her afternoon feeding when she heard Marcus's key in the front door. He was home unusually early, and she could hear his voice before he even entered the house. Understand the implications, Amber. If we don't secure new contracts in the next 30 days, I'll have to start laying people off. Victoria froze. Amber was here, in their home, discussing business matters that would affect their family's future. I know it's scary. Amber's voice was soft, sympathetic, but you'll figure it out. You always do. Victoria moved quietly toward the living room, Charlotte still in her arms. Through the archway, she could see Marcus and Amber standing close together near the fireplace, their body language intimate and familiar. The stress is killing me, Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. Between the business crisis and everything at home. Oh, what do you mean everything at home? Marcus glanced toward the stairs as if checking to make sure Victoria wasn't listening. Victoria's struggling with the baby. Postpartum depression, I think. She's been emotional, demanding, constantly needing attention. Victoria's breath caught. She'd been nothing but supportive since Charlotte's birth, asking for minimal help while managing both recovery and newborn care alone. That must be so hard for you, Amber said, placing her hand on Marcus's arm. You're dealing with business problems and a depressed wife? No wonder you're exhausted. It's not sustainable, Marcus said quietly. Something has to change. What kind of change? Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into the fireplace. I've been thinking about what we discussed in Portland, about starting fresh, building something new together. You mean the divorce? I mean taking control of my life. The business is failing, Victoria is struggling, and I'm drowning trying to hold everything together. Marcus turned to face Amber fully. Maybe it's time to cut my losses. Victoria felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Marcus was discussing their marriage and family like a failing business venture, with Amber as his advisor on how to minimize his losses. What about the baby? Amber asked. Custody arrangements can be managed. Honestly, Victoria will probably be relieved to have less pressure. She can focus on being a mother, and I can focus on rebuilding my career. And we can finally be together properly. Exactly. Marcus pulled Amber into his arms. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending. You make me happy in a way I haven't felt in years. Victoria watched her husband kiss another woman in their living room, planning the destruction of their family while their 2-week-old daughter slept in her arms. The betrayal was complete now, witnessed and documented. But it was Amber's next words that sealed Marcus's fate. What about child support? Won't that be expensive? Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and calculating. Victoria has no income, no career, no financial resources. My lawyers say I can argue for minimal support based on her dependence. Maybe $500 a month, plus health insurance. That's all? She'll probably remarry quickly anyway. Pretty women with babies find new husbands easily enough. It's not like she'll be alone forever. Victoria felt something cold and final settle in her chest. Marcus wasn't just planning to abandon their family. He was already planning Victoria's next relationship, as if she were a problem to be passed along to someone else. You've thought this all through, Amber said admiringly. I have to be practical. Business is business, whether it's corporate contracts or personal relationships. Victoria had heard enough. She carried Charlotte upstairs to the nursery, her hands shaking as she placed her daughter in the crib. Then she sat in the rocking chair and called Rebecca. "I need you to file papers immediately," Victoria said without preamble. "Victoria? What happened?" "He's here in our house. With her. Planning our divorce while I'm upstairs with our 2-week-old daughter." Rebecca's intake of breath was sharp. "I'll have papers ready by tomorrow morning. But Victoria, are you ready for what comes next?" Victoria looked at Charlotte sleeping peacefully, her tiny hands curled into fists. "I'm ready to show Marcus exactly what kind of woman he married. Then let's do this properly. No more waiting, no more gathering evidence. It's time to go nuclear." After Rebecca hung up, Victoria remained in the rocking chair, listening to Marcus and Amber's voices drifting up from the living room. They were discussing apartments now, neighborhoods that would be convenient for Marcus's commute, how quickly he could move out after filing papers. Her marriage was over, not because she and Marcus had grown apart or faced insurmountable differences, but because Marcus had decided their family was less valuable than his fantasy of starting over with a younger woman. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled to her father's number. "Dad, it's time. I need you to accelerate everything." "What's happened?" "Marcus is planning to offer me $500 a month in child support because he thinks I have no resources to fight back." Harrison Sterling's silence was deadly. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the cold authority that had built a global empire. "That was a mistake. Dad, there's something else. I want full custody of Charlotte. I don't want her growing up thinking this is how fathers treat their families. Consider it done. Victoria, by the time we're finished, Marcus Whitfield will understand exactly what he's lost." As Victoria hung up the phone, she felt the last vestiges of her old life falling away. She was no longer the accommodating wife, the perfect homemaker, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. She was Victoria Sterling, and she was done being underestimated. The law offices of Blackwood, Sterling and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Elliott Bay. Victoria had never been to Thomas's office, but she recognized the understated elegance that characterized everything connected to Sterling Global. Expensive without being ostentatious, powerful without needing to advertise that power. Marcus sat across from her at the polished conference table, flanked by his attorney, David Richardson, a man who specialized in protecting wealthy husbands from expensive divorces. Amber sat beside Marcus, her presence a calculated insult that Victoria had expected. "I appreciate you both coming," Marcus said, his voice carrying the patronizing tone of a man who believed he controlled the situation. "I know this is difficult, but I think we can reach an amicable agreement that works for everyone." Victoria smiled serenely, her hands folded over the portfolio Thomas had prepared for this moment. "I'm certainly interested in hearing your proposal." David Richardson cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "My client is prepared to be quite generous, Mrs. Whitfield. Given the circumstances of your marriage and your current financial position, Mr. Whitfield is offering a settlement of $2.5 million, plus child support of $1,000 per month until Charlotte reaches 18. Victoria pretended to consider the offer seriously. "That's very generous. And custody arrangements?" "Shared custody, of course," Marcus said quickly. "Though given my work schedule and your expertise with childcare, I'd expect Charlotte to spend most of her time with you." "Most of her time?" "Every other weekend and one weeknight, perhaps. I travel frequently for business, so I'll need flexibility." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And this arrangement assumes I'll continue living modestly, managing our daughter's needs on the support you've outlined?" "Exactly." Marcus's smile was pleased, the expression of a man who believed he'd found the perfect solution. "You'll have financial security, and I'll have the freedom to rebuild my career and personal life." With Amber, Marcus had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "With my future wife, yes." Victoria glanced at Amber, who was trying to look sympathetic rather than triumphant. "And you're comfortable with this arrangement, Miss Collins?" "I just want Marcus to be happy," Amber said sweetly. "And I want what's best for Charlotte, of course." "Of course." Hanetpon. Victoria opened her portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. "Before I respond to your generous offer, I should probably clarify a few things about my own financial position." David Richardson frowned. "Mrs. Whitfield, My understanding is that you have no significant assets or income independent of your marriage. That understanding is incorrect. Victoria slid the paper across the table. This is my birth certificate. Marcus glanced at the document dismissively, then froze as he processed what he was reading. Victoria Sterling? Your maiden name is Sterling? That's correct. Sterling like Sterling Global Shipping? Exactly like Sterling Global Shipping. Victoria's voice remained calm, conversational. Harrison Sterling is my father. The conference room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Marcus stared at the birth certificate as if it were written in a foreign language. That's impossible, he said finally. You work as a museum curator. You live modestly. Your parents are estranged middle-class people who disapproved of your independence. All true, technically. I did work as a museum curator because I chose to. I lived modestly because I wanted to prove I could support myself, and my parents and I were estranged, though we've recently reconciled. Victoria smiled. They're quite excited about meeting their granddaughter? Amber looked confused. I don't understand. If your father owns a shipping company, why didn't you ever mention it? Because Marcus never asked. In 3 years of marriage, he never once inquired about my family background, my childhood, or my financial situation before we met. Victoria's eyes remained fixed on Marcus's face. He simply assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be. David Richardson was frantically taking notes. Mrs. Whitfield, this changes the financial calculations significantly. If you have access to family wealth— Oh, I don't just have access to it, Victoria interrupted gently. I'm the sole heir to Sterling Global Shipping. Current estimated value, $23 billion. Marcus's face had gone completely white. 23 billion? Give or take a few million, depending on market fluctuations. Victoria removed another document from her portfolio. This might also interest you. It's an analysis of Whitfield Technologies' revenue sources over the past 3 years. She slid the paper toward Marcus, watching as he scanned the financial breakdown Thomas had prepared. According to this analysis, approximately 38% of your company's revenue comes from contracts with Sterling Global subsidiaries, Victoria continued. Contracts that were awarded through standard bidding processes, I should note. You earned those partnerships through competitive proposals. Marcus was reading the document with growing horror. You're saying my success is based on your family's business? I'm saying your success is partly based on contracts with Sterling Global, yes. Contracts that you negotiated and fulfilled professionally. Victoria's tone remained perfectly reasonable. Of course, those contracts are up for renewal soon. What does that mean? Thomas Blackwood chose that moment to enter the conference room, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 65, Thomas was a man who'd spent decades protecting Sterling family interests, and his reputation preceded him. Mr. Whitfield, Thomas said, extending his hand with cool professionalism. Thomas Blackwood, Sterling Family Counsel. I believe we need to discuss the future of your business relationships. Marcus stood automatically, accepting the handshake with obvious confusion. I don't understand. What business relationships? The contracts between Whitfield Technologies and Sterling Global subsidiaries, Thomas explained patiently. Contracts that terminate in 30 days and will not be renewed. What? Why? Thomas consulted his notes with theatrical precision. Standard corporate restructuring. Sterling Global has decided to consolidate logistics partnerships with larger, more stable firms. Nothing personal, of course. Marcus turned to Victoria, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. You did this. You're destroying my company. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus. I'm simply a Sterling family member who asked for advice about my divorce settlement. Victoria's voice remained calm. My father naturally wants to ensure I'm financially protected during this difficult time. This is extortion, Thomas raised an eyebrow. Mr. Whitfield, I'd be careful about making accusations you can't support. Sterling Global has the right to choose its business partners. The fact that those partnerships may have indirectly benefited your company doesn't create any legal obligation to continue them. David Richardson was scribbling notes furiously. We need to discuss this privately. Mr. Whitfield, I think we should reconsider our negotiating position. There's nothing to reconsider, Victoria said firmly. I'm rejecting your initial offer and presenting my own terms. She removed a final document from her portfolio. 50% of all marital assets, including Whitfield Technologies. Full custody of Charlotte, with supervised visitation for Marcus pending psychological evaluation, and spousal support of $50,000 per month for the next 10 years. Marcus's jaw dropped. $50,000 a month? That's insane. That's actually quite modest given my family's financial resources, Victoria replied. I could ask for much more. Amber, who had been silent throughout the revelations, finally found her voice. Marcus, maybe we should reconsider. If Victoria is really worth billions, I'm not worth billions, Amber. My family is worth billions, and my family protects its members from people who try to take advantage of them. Victoria stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 48 hours to respond to my terms. If you reject them, I'll file for divorce in court and pursue maximum damages for adultery, abandonment, and emotional distress. Victoria, wait! Marcus stood as well, his composure finally cracking. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Think about Charlotte. She needs her father. Victoria looked at the man she'd loved for 3 years, the man who'd planned to abandon their daughter for the fantasy of starting over with a younger woman. Charlotte needs a father who values her, Marcus. If you choose to become that man, we can discuss modified custody arrangements. But your days of treating our family like a disposable asset are over. As Victoria left the conference room, she could hear Marcus and his attorney arguing in heated whispers. Amber was crying quietly, probably realizing that her future as Mrs. Marcus Whitfield had just evaporated along with his fortune. Victoria felt no satisfaction in their distress, only a profound sense of relief. The perfect wife was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. Her daughter would grow up knowing that standing up for yourself wasn't selfish, it was essential. 6 months after the most expensive divorce settlement in Seattle legal history, Victoria sat in her father's office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Global headquarters, Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her arms while she reviewed expansion plans for the company's Pacific Northwest operations. The view from Harrison Sterling's office encompassed Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains, and most of downtown Seattle. From this vantage point, Victoria could see the building that had once housed Whitfield Technologies, now occupied by a maritime insurance firm that had purchased the space after Marcus's bankruptcy. The Portland acquisition is proceeding ahead of schedule, Thomas reported, consulting his tablet as he delivered the weekly family business update. We should have full operational control by the end of the quarter. And the regulatory approvals for the Vancouver expansion? Victoria asked, bouncing Charlotte gently as she started to fuss. Approved last week. Harrison was right. Having a Sterling actively involved in negotiations made all the difference with the Canadian authorities. Victoria smiled at the reference to her new role as Sterling Global's Director of Strategic Development. After 11 years away from the family business, she discovered that her MBA and years of observing Marcus's operations had given her valuable insights into corporate strategy. More importantly, she'd found that she genuinely enjoyed the work. Building something meaningful, creating partnerships that benefited everyone involved, and planning for a future that extended beyond quarterly profit reports gave her a sense of purpose she'd never found as the perfect corporate wife. What's the latest on the custody evaluation? Thomas asked, switching to personal matters. Victoria's expression grew serious. Dr. Peterson recommended supervised visitation continue for another 6 months. Marcus missed 3 scheduled appointments last month, and when he does show up, he spends most of the time on his phone. Is he still seeing the Collins woman? No. Amber discovered that dating a bankrupt former CEO wasn't as exciting as she'd imagined. She moved to Los Angeles last month to pursue new opportunities. Thomas made a note on his tablet. And Marcus's emotional state? Volatile. He alternates between rage about the divorce settlement and attempts to reconcile. Dr. Peterson thinks he's struggling with narcissistic injury, the reality that his actions had consequences he couldn't control. Charlotte stirred in Victoria's arms, opening her eyes and gazing around the office, with the alert curiosity of a 6-month-old discovering her world. She'd grown into a beautiful baby, with Marcus's dark hair but Victoria's determined jaw and intelligent blue eyes. She's going to be trouble, Harrison said, appearing in the doorway with his characteristic timing. At 67, he moved with the energy of a much younger man, especially when discussing his granddaughter. I can already see it in her eyes. Good trouble, I hope, Victoria said, accepting her father's kiss on her cheek. The best kind. Strong women who refuse to accept limitations change the world. Harrison settled into his chair and regarded his daughter seriously. Speaking of which, the board meeting is next week. Are you ready for the announcement? Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness. As ready as anyone can be for officially becoming the heir apparent to a $23 billion empire. You've earned it, Harrison said firmly. 6 months ago, you came home as a woman seeking justice for her family. Now you're here as a business leader who's proven she can think strategically under pressure. The board sees the difference. What about the divorce settlement funds? Victoria asked. I still feel uncomfortable about taking Marcus's money. Thomas looked up from his tablet. You mean the $12 million from your 50% stake in Whitfield Technologies? That money represents Marcus's life work, even if he destroyed it through his own choices. Victoria, Harrison's voice carried the patient tone of a man explaining basic principles. That money represents the value you added to his business through your family connections, whether he acknowledged it or not. Sterling Global Contracts built half his company's worth. Besides, Thomas added, you've already donated most of it to women's shelters and legal aid organizations. You kept just enough to establish Charlotte's trust fund. Victoria nodded, still adjusting to the reality of her financial transformation. The divorce settlement had been substantial, but it paled in comparison to her inheritance from Sterling Global. More importantly, the settlement had served its purpose, ensuring Marcus understood exactly what he'd thrown away. Has he contacted you recently? Harrison asked, as if reading her thoughts. He calls every few weeks, usually after he's been drinking. The conversations follow the same pattern. Anger about the divorce terms, promises that he's changed, demands that I use my family connections to help him restart his business. And your response? That he's welcome to rebuild his career on his own merits, just like I did for 11 years. Victoria's voice was firm. I won't use Sterling Global resources to rescue him from the consequences of his choices. Charlotte began fussing, and Victoria automatically shifted to comfort her. Motherhood had taught her about unconditional love in ways that marriage never had. Every day with Charlotte reminded her of what Marcus had been willing to abandon for the fantasy of starting over. The private investigator's report came in yesterday, Thomas said quietly. Marcus is working as a logistics consultant for a mid-sized firm in Tacoma. $60,000 a year, shared apartment with a roommate, drives a 5-year-old Honda. Victoria felt a pang of something that wasn't quite sympathy. How is he handling the adjustment? About as well as you'd expect from a man who went from thinking he was worth millions to discovering he's essentially starting over at 38. Any signs he's learning from the experience? Thomas and Harrison exchanged glances. The investigator says Marcus still talks about the divorce like something that happened to him rather than something he caused. He tells people his ex-wife's family destroyed his business out of spite. Victoria sighed. So no personal growth or accountability. Some people never learn, Harrison said gently. The important thing is that you and Charlotte are safe in building something positive. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Margaret Sterling appeared, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing the radiant smile she'd maintained since Victoria's return. I hope I'm not interrupting, Margaret said, approaching Charlotte with outstretched arms. But someone has a pediatrician appointment in an hour, and Grandma wanted to say hello first. Victoria handed Charlotte to her mother, watching Margaret's face light up as she held her granddaughter. The transformation in her parents since her return had been remarkable. The grief and worry they'd carried for 11 years had been replaced by joy and renewed purpose. Dr. Chen says Charlotte is developing beautifully, Margaret reported. Advanced motor skills, excellent social awareness, and she's already trying to communicate with specific sounds. She gets that from Victoria, Harrison said proudly, always determined to make herself understood. Victoria felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the office windows. For the first time in her adult life, she was exactly where she belonged, with family who valued her, work that challenged her, and a daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen with an update. Court approved the final custody modification. Marcus gets supervised visits twice a month, pending continued evaluation. Victoria showed the message to Thomas, who nodded approvingly. Dr. Peterson's recommendation? She says Marcus still views Charlotte as an extension of his relationship with me rather than as an individual person. Until that changes, supervised visits are safest for everyone. And if it doesn't change, Victoria considered the question seriously, then Charlotte will grow up with one parent who puts her needs first, which is better than two parents in conflict. Margaret looked up from playing with Charlotte. You know, darling, I've been thinking about your situation a lot lately. Do you have any regrets about how things ended with Marcus? Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering her mother's question. I regret that Charlotte will grow up without the father she deserves. I regret that Marcus was too focused on what he thought he wanted to appreciate what he had. But I don't regret protecting our family or standing up for our worth. Good, Margaret said firmly. A woman who accepts less than she deserves teaches her daughter to do the same. As the afternoon progressed, Victoria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months ago, she'd been the perfect wife, accommodating and supportive, building her entire identity around Marcus's needs and ambitions. The narcissistic abuse had been subtle, but pervasive. The constant message that her thoughts, feelings, and contributions were less important than maintaining his comfort and success. She'd minimized herself to make room for his ego, convinced that love meant sacrifice rather than mutual respect. Now she understood that real love didn't require diminishing yourself. Real love celebrated your strength, supported your growth, and valued your contributions. The right partner would have been proud to discover her sterling heritage, not threatened by it. Victoria, Harrison's voice brought her back to the present. The legal team needs your signature on the expansion contracts. Victoria accepted the documents, noting how natural it felt to review terms and negotiate details. The skills she'd developed over years of supporting Marcus's business had prepared her for this role in ways she'd never anticipated. There's something else we need to discuss, Harrison said as Victoria finished signing. Security has reported that Marcus has been asking questions about Sterling Global's headquarters building. Nothing threatening, but persistent inquiries about visiting hours and building access. Victoria felt a chill of concern. What kind of questions? Whether the building offers public tours, how to schedule meetings with executives, whether family members have special access privileges. Thomas consulted his notes. The security team thinks he's trying to find a way to approach you or your parents directly. What should we do? Harrison's expression hardened with protective instincts. We've updated building security protocols and informed the team that Marcus Whitfield is not welcome on Sterling Global property under any circumstances. And if he persists, then we'll pursue a restraining order, Thomas said firmly. You've made your position clear through legal channels. Any attempt to circumvent those boundaries constitutes harassment. Victoria nodded, feeling grateful for the protective circle her family had created around her and Charlotte. The financial independence Sterling Global provided was important, but the emotional security of knowing she wasn't facing Marcus's manipulations alone was priceless. Charlotte began crying softly, and Victoria recognized the familiar signs of hunger. I should feed her before we leave for the pediatrician. Margaret stood immediately. Use Harrison's private office. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. As Victoria settled into the comfortable chair behind her father's desk, nursing Charlotte while gazing out at the Seattle skyline, she felt a profound sense of completion. She'd spent 11 years running from this legacy, convinced that independence meant isolation. Now she understood that true independence meant having the strength to ask for help when needed, the wisdom to recognize your own worth, and the courage to protect what mattered most. Charlotte finished nursing and settled back to sleep in Victoria's arms. Her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger with unconscious trust. Someday Victoria would tell her daughter about the choices that had brought them to this moment, about the importance of knowing your worth, standing up for your values, and refusing to accept treatment that diminished your dignity. But for now, it was enough to sit in the afternoon sunshine, holding her daughter close, surrounded by family who loved them both unconditionally. Victoria's phone buzzed with another message. This one from Dr. Peterson. Marcus missed today's scheduled visit. Charlotte seemed relieved rather than disappointed, continuing to monitor the situation. Victoria deleted the message without showing it to her parents. Marcus's absence spoke louder than any words about his priorities in his capacity for change. Charlotte deserved better, and now she would have it. The intercom on Harrison's desk crackled to life. "Mr. Sterling, your daughter's car is ready downstairs for the pediatrician appointment." "Thank you, James," Harrison replied, then turned to Victoria. "Ready for the next adventure in motherhood?" Victoria gathered her things, adjusting Charlotte's blanket with practiced ease. Ready for whatever comes next. As they prepared to leave the office, Thomas handed Victoria a final document. One more signature needed, the papers establishing Charlotte's education trust fund. Victoria scanned the paperwork, noting the substantial sum her parents had contributed to ensure their granddaughter's future. "This is incredibly generous." "It's an investment in the next generation of Sterling women," Margaret said proudly. "Charlotte will have every opportunity to become whoever she chooses to be." Victoria signed the document with a sense of completing a circle. Her own trust fund had given her the freedom to run away at 18, to live independently, to make her own mistakes and discoveries. Charlotte's trust fund would give her different opportunities, the chance to build on a foundation of love and support rather than fleeing from expectations and control. "There's one more thing," Harrison said as they reached the elevator. "The board wants to announce your promotion at next month's shareholders meeting. Are you prepared for the media attention?" Victoria considered the question seriously. Becoming the public face of Sterling Global would mean the end of her privacy, intense scrutiny of her personal life, and inevitable questions about the divorce that had brought her home. "Will they ask about Marcus?" "Undoubtedly," Thomas replied. "The financial press loves stories about wealthy divorces." "Then I'll tell them the truth," Victoria said firmly, "that I was married to a man who didn't value what he had, and that I'm grateful to be building something better for my daughter." As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her old life falling away. The accommodating wife who'd sacrificed her identity for someone else's comfort was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that protecting yourself and your child wasn't selfish. It was essential. The doors opened to reveal James, the Sterling family driver, waiting beside a black sedan. As he helped Victoria into the car with Charlotte, she caught a glimpse of herself in the tinted window, a successful executive, devoted mother, and Sterling family heir who'd finally come home. "Mrs. Whitfield," James said as they pulled out of the garage, "where to first? The pediatrician or the lawyer's office?" Victoria smiled at the question. 6 months ago, those would have been destinations that filled her with anxiety. Medical appointments to navigate alone, legal meetings to endure as Marcus's victim. Now they were simply items on the schedule of a woman building the life she wanted. "The pediatrician first," she said, settling back in the leather seat with Charlotte in her arms. "Then home." As the car moved through downtown Seattle traffic, Victoria allowed herself one final thought about Marcus. Somewhere across the city, he was probably sitting in his shared apartment, making plans to rebuild his life and career, convinced that he'd been wronged by circumstances beyond his control. He would never understand that he'd had everything he claimed to want: a beautiful family, financial security, and a partner who would have supported his dreams if he'd included her in them. He'd thrown it all away for the fantasy of something better, never realizing that what he already had was irreplaceable. Victoria had learned that lesson well. She would never again mistake accommodation for love or sacrifice her worth for someone else's comfort. More importantly, she would teach Charlotte that a woman's value wasn't measured by how much she was willing to give up, but by how much she insisted on being valued. The perfect wife was gone. In her place was something much more powerful, a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and refused to accept anything less. Some men spent their whole lives searching for treasure, never realizing they already had it at home. Marcus Whitfield had been one of those men. Victoria Sterling Whitfield would make sure her daughter never settled for being someone else's buried treasure. She would be the one holding the map, charting her own course and keeping what she found. The end.